As training camp approaches, we'll be reviewing several players' performances in the 2023 season and discussing how they could impact the Eagles during the 2024 season. Today, we'll be discussing Devin White. Devin White joins the Eagles after a rough end to his tenure in Tampa. The former second team All Pro has taken a fall from grace over the past several years, and hopefully he can right the track in Philadelphia. So let's take a look to see what went wrong with White in 2023 and see if he can get back on track with the Eagles this season. So let's start with the positives first. He has good long speed and short area acceleration and good movement skills in space. He's definitely a great athlete, and that's really why he was drafted as high as he was. And that's really highlights what he's best at. He's able to play sideline to sideline due to his speed, and he had the sixth fastest 40 time of all off-ball linebackers since 2006. On top of that, he is a good blitzer, and his burst allows him to close space quickly. He was tied for 8th in sacks last year among off-ball linebackers with 3.5. He was tied for 5th in quarterback hits with 5, and overall he was tied for 2nd in pressures with 25. And this bodes well for what Fangio likes to do with his linebackers, as the Dolphins were 11th in percentage of plays with a linebacker blitzing last season. We've discussed in previous episodes that Fangio is pretty aggressive. This is going to show up with both Dean and with White and whoever plays linebacker for the Eagles. On top of that, he should be an upgrade in coverage, as his acceleration and long speed allows him to close space underneath quickly. And like I said, he has fluid movement skills, which really helps him get depth and change directions quickly when he does need to gain space in his drops or to break on throws underneath. And he made a good number of impact plays in the pass game as well. Last season, his forced incompletion percentage was 32 out of 100 out of the top 100 linebackers. And he was tied for 8th in interceptions. And he's consistently made plays on the ball in the pass game over the past several years. And I expect him to be the linebacker that's primarily matched up with running backs and obvious passing downs, just looking at how the Eagles are structured and who they have on the roster right now. And overall, Fangio's defenses rely on underneath defenders that can rally to the ball quickly. So I think White really fits in with a lot of what Fangio is trying to do. Now, in terms of his negatives, he just does not have great football IQ. He's slow processing reads, and he's often late to fill his gaps. And he puts himself in bad position with blockers, as he's often taking false steps heading in the wrong direction before getting out to the proper gap. And he really struggles getting off blocks. Part of that has to do with the fact that he's just not overly physical when it comes to taking on blocks. He's pretty passive, and he often lets blockers control him and wash him out of gaps. And all of this is reflected in his metrics, as his tackle rate was, which is how many tackles he made in terms of run plays he was out on the field for. It was 91st out of the top 100 linebackers in the NFL last season. His stuff rate, so the amount of plays where he was able to make a tackle for a loss or a tackle for no gain, was 66th out of 100, and his missed tackle rate was 40th out of 100. So while he is a great athlete, there was a lot of negatives with his game, and it's just, there's always something there that's wanting you to see just a little bit more. What are your thoughts on him, Eric?
Yeah, well, I don't know where to start. I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of your sentiment. When I was watching him, you talked about how he's very fast in a straight line, and that's certainly true. But I think he's about 5'11", and you take someone who's that short and stout moving at that speed, it's very hard for him to stop on a dime. So once that momentum is going, that's just carrying him wherever he's going. Now, you mentioned good change of direction. I agree. When he's working laterally, just side to side and shuffling, it looks awesome. The second he starts going north-south, he's just a freight train, which at times can be good if you're trying to come up and make a tackle in the flats on a running back. You're playing QB spy on a quarterback. But you start to pursue shiftier players in the open field, and you're just coming in like a freight train, you get juked so easily. Even though he is shorter, it almost seems like he plays very high cut because he's barrel chested. So I don't think, despite his frame, that his center of gravity is that low. If the Eagles fans remember, Nigel Bradham kind of had that quality about him, where if someone just tried to change directions in the open field and he had a lot of momentum going one way, it was over. There's no way he could stop in time. Um, in the run plays, I noticed that he would. You talked about sometimes he'd be late. Also, there were times where he'd completely over pursue the play. So, a popular run scheme now is wide zone, where all the linemen are blocking kind of in the same direction, and then the running back can either bounce it outside, hit the hole, or cut back. It's kind of more limited options in that sense. So White, when he's pursuing the play, he'd be all the way across the line of scrimmage from the side he started on, and then the running back cuts back, and it's completely open grass. I agree. The football IQ is not there. Now, there's a lot of discussion about he was unhappy with his contract, and there was essentially disputes with the coaching staff. How much does that affect his play? We don't know that for sure. I mean, ultimately, he's out there. He's playing for a new contract. So, to me, it's not a real excuse that he looked the way he did on film. The other thing I didn't note that you mentioned was getting washed out of plays by blocks. This wasn't exclusive to tackles working up to the second level. Sometimes wide receivers would come on crackbacks and he would get blown up. I'm like, dude, you're 240 and yoked. How are you possibly getting dominated by Noah Brown, a 190-pound receiver soaking wet? So it was a little bit of a bizarre film. There was other times where he looked awesome in coverage. Like you said, he's got really good movement skills. He seems to even have like good instincts reading the quarterback's eyes at times. Now, it's unclear how that will extrapolate to the Fangio defense, because a lot of their zone coverage is based off vision, where they're looking at the wide receiver and looking at how their routes are developing, and then potentially looking through the wide receiver at the quarterback, as opposed to a spot drop where they're just taking an area of the field and trying to read the quarterback the whole way. That's where he got into trouble, because quarterbacks who were good at looking him off really got him out of position. So it's like, yeah, he was quick to read the quarterback's eyes and move into the appropriate position, but sometimes they were just able to manipulate him that way. So he really needs a coach like Fangio, who by all accounts is someone who preaches discipline. Ideally, he gives him the duties on the field that he's best at. You mentioned blitzing. I mean, if he comes in unblocked, I think he's the best blitzer potentially in the NFL. I mean, he comes in like a freight train and the quarterbacks have no chance. So I hope he's blitzed often. When we're facing mobile quarterbacks, I hope he's used as a spy. I hope his zone assignments are relegated to, like short, intermediate coverages and flat zones. And so there's potential for him to be a significant upgrade over what we had last year. But on the flip side, there's also the side of him that is a much lower floor than what we had with, say, like Cunningham, where you're never going to get an amazing play out of Cunningham, but I also think you're rarely going to get a terrible play. I think he's much more volatile in that sense. So curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so the interesting thing with White is, he had a pretty good first couple years of his career, and he really started to fall off after that. But the Bucks defenses have been pretty solid even with him on the team. So if you put good pieces around him, it's not like he's so bad that he's going to tank your team. And I think he'll definitely be an upgrade over who they had out there last year. He misses a lot of plays, but he does make his fair share of plays too, just in different ways. Again, like we brought up, his blitzing, his affecting the quarterback, by getting pressure. Those are plays you can't just overlook those. That's a way that he can be utilized. It's just something that Morrow and Cunningham weren't the greatest at last year. That's something that White will be better at, especially in coverage too. He's the big Eagles' biggest issue last year among their linebackers was their coverage issues. And his athleticism and his ability to just stick with a guy and run with a guy is much better than Cunningham and Morrow's. Just a better athlete than them. So I think there's some areas that he upgrades, but there's certain areas that where he doesn't. I thought Cunningham was a better run defender. He would really come up and strike blockers, and he would hold his gap. Whereas Dean or White really struggles with that. He'll get to his gap, and even if he gets to his gap, he'll just get moved right out of it, which is, I mean, that's an issue in its own right. You know, if he's already struggling to fit runs correctly, and I wouldn't say it's a huge issue, but there's a plenty of times that you'll see where he just gets lost looking for the ball. And on the plays where he is fitting the run right, if a blocker's just moving him out of the gap, it doesn't really matter at that point in time, you know? So I don't know what the upside is with him, really. I think, you know, being someone that can match up, especially on the weak side of trips with running backs, that's a huge area teams like to exploit defenses, especially Fangio defenses, is by getting linebackers matched up on running backs on the backside of trips. I think he can solve some of those issues, but at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure he's a guy that's going to be starting for the team next year. I think that he's going to get every opportunity to start, but I don't know if he beats out everyone else at the position, you know? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's scary proposition because, you know, it's not like you've got a bunch of all stars behind him. So you really hope that he can start. One of the things you mentioned about playing the running back in 3-by-1 sets on the backside. Now, I think he's capable of doing that, and there's lots of good reps of him covering running backs in that sense. I noticed this as a trend in a couple, like 3 or 4 games, and he didn't really get victimized by it just because the quarterback was looking somewhere else. But he does not respect the wheel route at all. I see he'll carry the guy, and then once the running back's about 10 yards downfield, he just pretty much puts his feet in cement, and the guy could just run right by him. I'm predicting he's giving up like a 70-yard touchdown next year if he is starting on the play like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts?
And it's tough because it's like you know he has a ability to run with those guys down the sideline, but no, I saw the same thing. I saw it with running backs. I saw it with tight ends. It was just like once the play went over 3-4 seconds, it was like he kind of just was coasting at the end and not running through the rep. I mean, that's kind of indicative of who he has been over the past several years. He's been called out on his effort. He's been called out on just not being the player he was expected to be when he was drafted that high. And with the success that he had early in his career, hopefully he can get back to that level of play with Fangio, but I'm not expecting that everything's just gonna switch all of a sudden. It's not like Todd Bowles is a respected coach, and if you're a guy that can't play well for Bowles, it doesn't make me think that you're going to go to another coach and play a whole lot better. So we'll have to see how that turns out, but
Yeah.
I'm not super high on White going into next year.
I mean, this guy, I touched on this earlier in the offseason. He played his whole career next to Levante David. To me, this guy is one of the smartest players in the entire NFL. And Devin White started with the green dot, which some Eagles fans may not know. He lost that. And I was like, how could you not pick up something like just... And I saw many times where pre-snap Levante David's in his ear saying, do this, do that. And then after the play, they're coming and huddling together. So it's like the dialogue's happening, but how much is it getting into White's head? And like, is he enacting what David's telling him? So, you know, there's definitely a lot of skepticism about it works. Of course, we hope it does because, you know, last year was brutal for the linebackers, like you mentioned, specifically in coverage. Other teams, once they got into that bad run, they're just like, oh, well, we can just get Morrow against like one of our dynamic slot guys or tight ends, and they have no chance. And then we had that basically running carousel of slot corners due to injury and other factors, and they did the same thing to those guys. So, you know, if White is a middling run defender, but like highly effective in mitigating those passes over the middle, to me, that's a gigantic win.